Representative Frank, I welcome you to the Senate Banking Committee today. As one of the architects of the Wall Street Reform Bill, I want to thank you again for all your hard work in ushering this legislation through Congress. I know that you have to get back to manage a bill on the House floor, so please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad to be here in the spirit of bipartisanship, and I say that because I was struck by the very bipartisan tone of the ranking member's statement. For example, he was extremely critical of the Bush administration. I might not have anticipated that, but I say that because, as members will remember, it was in the fall of 2008 that we were summoned by Secretary Paulson and then Chairman Bernanke, two Bush appointees, and asked to do the TARP. And in fact, there was a bipartisan response to that. The gentleman from Alabama is very critical of the TARP. I think he's unfair to the Bush administration in that regard. But I do appreciate the bipartisan nature of his criticism. I would note, he said, Secretary Geithner said they've made a profit on the loan to the banks, and he rebutted that with reference to the automobiles and the foreclosures. Well, that doesn't rebut the statement. He very carefully said it was from the banks. It is true we have not yet recovered the money from the automobiles. What we have instead is a thriving American automobile industry, GM and Chrysler, which I think would not have happened if we hadn't intervened. And I note that Ford, which was not seeking any of the funds, actively supported that for fear that if both General Motors and Chrysler had gone bankrupt and were not assisted, the supply chain would have disappeared. So at a time when we all talk about enhancing manufacturing in America, that was, I think, the single biggest thing that we did. Secondly, I would have to say, though, that the gentleman from Alabama's description of the legislative process doesn't cover what went on in the House. As for the Senate, I know there were some discussions between him and the senator from Tennessee, and I wasn't privy to them. But it certainly was not a case where the administration told us to go forward. On the Consumer Bureau, I was one of the ones who said no. The solution that he talked about, namely elevating the status bureaucratically of a consumer protection function within an entity that's primarily a bank regulator, wouldn't work. There's a qualitative difference between having an independent consumer regulator and having it as one of the things bank regulators do, because the history was clear that bank regulators didn't do it. In fact, interestingly, the largest single chunk of authority to protect consumers that existed before this law was passed was at the Federal Reserve. And when we questioned the Federal Reserve, they had very little to do with things.